join us. Yeah. All the sessions like this. Yeah, don't worry. All the sessions like this. And it's live streamed. Not live streamed. It's recorded. So good to see your face. Welcome. We are going to start our session very soon. We're just giving a minute or two to welcome other participants. Just to maybe mention the topic of this session. So we'll be discussing about facilitating community ownership, and we will have three wonderful speakers sharing the learning from evidence-informed approaches to prevent violence against children. So we will be starting very soon when we have more participants to join us. Let me see if it's perfect.
En el panel no, pero que haya presente.
Welcome again for colleagues who are already here in the room. So this session will be focusing on facilitating community ownership. I welcome other participants joining us from outside. Okay, I think we should be starting, right, as we have quite a bit of our participants joining. So welcome again, and good morning. It's the last day of the Alliance meeting. I hope you still have the energies and you're still engaging into the conversation. As I mentioned, so this topic, this session focuses on facilitating community ownership, and we will be having a team to share the learning from their community-led approach to prevent violence against children. My name is Joy. I'm the lead of the community-level child protection task force, and I work for World Vision International. So today I will be the facilitator facilitating the conversation. Just to begin with the session by doing some advertisement, we have a group called Community Level Child Protection Task Force, and we do have members from the international organization and also local NGOs participating in this group. This task force was formed in 2016, and initially it was called Community-Based Child Protection in Emergencies Task Force, quite a long name. But in 2019, the group undertook a literature review to analyze the approaches that we use in humanitarian setting with the community, and find out that there are actually different types of approaches that we use at community level. So in 2020, we renamed the group as the Community Level Child Protection Task Force to better capture the different types of approaches. And we do also have a specific page on the Alliance website where you can find our objectives, the contact email, and also the resources being developed by the task force. So you're welcome to also check on the website to see if there are other resources that you might be interested. And then yesterday, I also took the opportunity to present a new theory of change for CCP programming during the Hot Off the Press session. And in that session, if you remember that I present some three circles. Now I'm only presenting the major two, which are the community-based approach and community-led approach. We use these terms a lot in community-level child protection programming. And sometimes we saw that practitioners use the terms interchangeably, thinking community-based is equal to community-led. So we would like to also take a bit of the time in these sessions to discuss and further reflect on these two different approaches that we see, and also the different outcomes that can be achieved through the two approaches. And then we also wanted to take the time to reflect on our current approach working with community. So I'm going to share some of the statements in the next few slides. So you're welcome to take 30 seconds or a few moments to reflect if this is your current approach working with the community. You don't need to answer it out loud, but just maybe an individual reflection. And thinking about this approach is community-based or community-led. And then we will take it from there for further discussion. So the first one is about we establish community-based child protection committee and train members on child protection topics. So maybe take a moment to reflect if this is the approach that you're currently using and whether this is community-based or community-led. So this is one of the approaches that we use a lot in our humanitarian program. The next one is about we plan and implement activities with the community according to the project time frame. Reflect a bit about whether we are also using this approach. Is it very common that we have a 6-month project, then in January we set up community-based child protection committee. February, we need to have meeting. March, we need to have action plan. April, we need to implement. May, we need to evaluate. And June, bye-bye, finish. So that's our common approach. Is it community-based or community-led? Another one, the community continue their actions after the project ends. So if we manage to go back after our project ends, do we still that the community are taking actions without your intervention, without your external support? So is it community-based or community-led? So good to reflect a little bit on the approach. So just to highlight or summarize, when we consider what is community-based approach, I also talked a little bit about it during yesterday's Hot Off the Press session. So when we mention about community-based, the task force consider that this refers to activities being implemented within the context of a community. So it happened, it takes place within the community. It usually it's initiated by agencies or other actors that is external to the community. And usually it's quite like top-down approach, and we use similar approach across different communities. As I mentioned, maybe from a 6-month project, you might do it in village A, and then you just do the same in village B, C, D because of the time frame or because of lack of further in-depth context analysis. We tend to do the one-size-fits-all approach. And then it tends to also be not very sustainable. If you manage to go back, as I mentioned, if the project ends and you manage to go back after 6 months, you probably don't find any committee members being still meeting or taking actions because it's quite external driven, agencies driven. So for the task force, we really want to push a change, shifting from community-based, as I mentioned yesterday, towards to higher level of community ownership. And most often we find that when we want to push these changes to happen, we face a lot of resistance whether it's internally or externally. But mostly we see the resistance coming from internal to the organization. So in humanitarian response, we value a lot on the outcome impact. So your management might push you to say, we cannot spend 1 year to build relationship. We need to see result. Give me the numbers. Or a donor might come to you to say, you can only have 6 months funding. You're not allowed to have 2 years to work with the community to identify plans and build their capacity. So we face a lot of challenges, whether from our management, from the humanitarian structure, funding structure. But we still see and believe that there are entry points to promote higher level of community ownership whenever possible. So if you're purely top-down, at least you can increase the elements of active participation, or you find ways to really involve community in decision-making process. So in the most challenging humanitarian context, we still believe that this is possible, there is space. But today we are lucky to have a team that actually who can share, which is the high-end goal that in community-level child protection programming, which is community-led approach. We recognize that this might not be applicable in a lot of the humanitarian settings, but we believe that we can also learn from the experience on how to implement community-led approaches in humanitarian response within, like, maybe also facing some issue with short time frame, funding shortage. And we are lucky to have the 3 speakers who are going to share the experience and learning in their community-led project called SEED. Juan is going to explain what SEED mean. Yesterday I also asked about whether this is an acronym or it means something else. So that project is called SEED. It's a community-led project. And I'm happy to really introduce our speaker to you. Our first speaker is Juan Jose Castellano. Sorry for my pronunciation. He's the program manager from War Child Colombia. And then we have Maranice Gandero, who is the community coach officers from War Child Colombia. And Maranice is from a region called Guajira, where the project was being implemented. So she is the community coach officers that facilitating the whole process. And we are really excited to have her here. This is her first international travel, so we're very happy to have her joining this meeting. And then we also have Olga Lucia Ramirez, who led on the feasibility study of the project, and now she is with UNHCR Colombia. So without further ado, let me hand it over to Juan to talk about the SEED project. Thank you. Juan, over to you.
Thank you, Joy. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Joy. I will speak in Spanish. I am from Colombia, therefore I will be speaking in Spanish. What I'm going to present right now are SEEDs. More than a methodology is an intervention to a project. It's a focus. It's focused on child protection. It's community-led. We worked with Work Child Disability Children, so we worked with these 2 organizations. So I am here today to share a little bit of the experience from Work Child, but without a doubt, Save the Children has been working on this. To start, I would have to say that SEEDS is an approach or a focus which works based on installed capacities or the capacities that we currently find in the community and strengths that the community has. So SEED simply builds on what we find in the community. Our approach is not simply to intervene in the communities, rather to understand what is the exact problems that they have in terms of child protection. It is very important to say that in SEEDS, all of our communities communities lead, not the agencies. And they are on the driver's seat. In other words, they lead the whole process. What we seek to achieve and what we have been assessing is that we need greater community ownership and sustainability. Let us begin my presentation with a video regarding community ownership, which is one of the topics that we must address today. So let us begin.
Clear that the two terms have been used interchangeably and people confuse the meaning of the two. What defines community-led versus community-based is about the power, like who holds the power to make a decision. If the community holds the power to make a decision and drive the process, then that's community-led. That a process or a project can be community-based, but not community-led. So community-based simply means it is located within a community. But if the communities do not hold the power to make decisions, then it is just based, but not being led by the community.
Tofauti ya Afro na Wafifi ni kwamba makuza mashinani, clusters na village elders. Kuza fumala na kusumrana na kufambira kukala ni mwatu wa muhimu na shirika na malari manye mnanoni hedu mna malamu handrezi. Fikara siswenye as community siswenye nisufuro keresi taukitsagula tatizo bomu kuno kwehu kwiziro hukira kamara takudangane naro ni hiro nafuki kama hapo na vifurisho funa vihenda si yao kuza na ujumbe lakini ujumbe ambola kaisa community ndo fikara funafuatilia kukurana noni.
And the emphasis was on what is this thing that you feel one is valuable to you, and what is this thing that you feel you can do or you can work on without any external support.
Change of mindset.
Za marafa were ganaza na mpangilio ya kwao ndo tofauti. Ganaza na mpangilio ya kwao, ganaza mambira kitumaricho kiplan kare.
And again, now we don't go in to teach the community about child rights. Rather, we learn from the community and we engage the community to identify activities that would address these child protection issues.
Nimekaa nikiwa na jamii na mashirika mengi. So miaka hili nimekaa karibu 35 years, kama 36 years. Nimeona mashirika mengi. Lakini hii ambao tuko nayo sasa, ile ambao niseme nimepatiwa uhuru wa kujieleza na kuzungumza, walileta mbinu ya kudili na huyu mtoto achue haki yake. Ni kitu gani, njia gani atafuata na njia gani itamsaidia katika maisha. Kwa sababu hii kusema kweli hii shirika ni tofauti na zile zingine.
I also came from a background where, for a very long time, I had thought that the community members do not understand certain issues that the NGOs try to drive. Like they don't understand children's rights. They can't come up even with an activity to address an issue in the community. But I was challenged when this community could identify all these issues and also identify even the harms to children themselves, even though they don't call it children's rights. But if you look at them, if you compare them with what we talk of children's rights, they are more or less the same. They're the same children's rights.
Nimefurahika kwa sababu kila mtu alikuwa amepewa uhuru wa kuongea. Wengine walikuwa bado wako na woga, lakini wamekuja wakachangamka, wako kwanza wanajibu.
Kama mimi ndo kiongozi wa hiyo wa huu mkutano wa vijana, ninahakikisha kila mmoja atakuwa na uzoefu wa kuongea na kusikiliza vizuri kwa umakini.
And then our approach was based on was built on this aspect of the community identifying issues and things they can do on their own without depending on any external support. Because we also noted that when fathers started talking about poverty, in their mind, they thought there would be an external support where maybe they would get money or they would get some grants to start business and all that. And so we clearly communicated to them that there would be no money, there would be no any tangible thing that they would get throughout the process. Yes, even for us, we brought the idea into the community. But through the learning phase, we learned about how to let that particular community take the lead in the whole process.
Community-led child protection approaches, high level of community ownership, and a minimum level of dependence on external actors. Inclusiveness, everyone must be able to participate. Collective community dialogue and collective decision-making. The community decides which child protection issues address and how to address them. Very well. So as we were able to see in the video, one of the things that are very important and that we want to address today is community ownership. And before anything, I have to say that this is 1 out of 7 videos that were developed in the community of Marafa. And these are different processes led by the community. I think that one of the things that this welcomes us to do, and maybe it was not very clear to those who speak English in our audience, is to be able to hear the voices of the community and how they perceive us as workers or as community agencies or international community. So this is one of the main changes that we want to achieve with this approach. We want to start with a reflection, how we are perceived, how we perceive ourselves, how the community perceives us, how do we work directly with the community. We actually carried out a case study to understand how we were perceived by the community. And what we got back from the study was that the community felt trust because we were there with them. We provided a companionment, and what they would say, and I know it would sound a little bit harsh, but what they would say is that we're not there just we don't arrive and simply leave. We're building trust in those communities. Now, what do we understand by community ownership? We understand by community ownership is the level or the degree in which the communities understand and or feel concern regarding the risk related to child protection and what affects them. And they feel like they have a responsibility to be they need to be involved in any actions in order to improve the life of boys and girls. So community ownership has several different components. One is that community ownership, that collective responsibility, engagement, and the diversification of leadership. Many times we have strong presence of leadership that does not allow those community ownership process. We should always ask ourselves as humanitarian organizations is, who owns this intervention? If I were to ask the community, who owns this intervention, what would I hear back from them? So what I propose to my beautiful audience is that if the answer is the name of our organization, then we must reflect a little bit more on what we're doing. I think what we seek to achieve with this type of processes is to change that perception for communities to understand or to perceive that the work doesn't come from Save the Children or Work Child. It is owned by them. Another thing is that SEEDS aims to establish different ways of how we interact or engage with the communities. We are present. We walk in with the community. We create spaces or use community spaces that traditionally are used in order for the community to gather. So these are different illustrations about traditional ways of how people come together. Sometimes we intervene this way. We arrive, elegantly dressed, very sharp, as you're able to see in the illustration. We bring an idea, and since the community perceives us and it's in front of us, even though they don't like the idea that's being brought by us, maybe they just nod and listen because they're being polite, and we have some power over the community. And many times we haven't really reflect on the power that we have over a community. Now let's look at this other illustration. This is another traditional way that could cause some skepticism. This is an adolescent telling his mother or caregiver, saying, "I know my rights," and this could be interpreted in a very complex way because these type of interactions could be a little bit troublesome. Now over here we see a humanitarian worker that is surprised because a year ago she was working in this community, and when she came back after a year there were still violence. So she was surprised, and she would say, well, we already came into this community. We already raised awareness about the violence and the things that were done in order to change this. So that's a little bit of what Joyce mentioned. We develop one-year programs, and we said, for example, we wanted to develop a committee or a team for child protection, and it's going to be financed based on what we are able to allocate as for funds. And we work directly with the communities, and what we do many times is that we leave the communities, and we leave these committees. But what happens with these committees, many times the structures that are built are not sustainable, and they're not aligned with the different structures or resources that the community has. So it is important to work directly with what the community has, including their structures and resources. These images or illustrations or even reflections are found in this manual called Moving Toward the Community Ownership. It's a 3-day workshop, and it was recently translated. This manual was recently translated into Spanish. This is work from Save the Children and Work for Children. Usually, we tend to work in a vertical manner. It's what we call top-down in our organizations. We have reviewed the evidence. There's an individual called Mike, it sounds like Wesley, and that reviews the evidence. And what it shows is that the top-down perspective has a lot of negative impact. It silences the community, and they're not as sustainable, and there's very low community ownership. Usually, these types of interventions are carried out by external agencies or humanitarian agencies, and we don't acknowledge or recognize the work that's carried out by the local communities. And with this, I want to, for us to all reflect on a different question whenever we carried out child protection. Who has the power to make decision? If we have the power and this power does not reside in the community, then it's not a community-led or community owned. If the power comes directly from the community, then there is community ownership. Other key messages about community-level child protection is that the work of child protection at a community level may be or could be more sustainable if the community feels that they own it. So when we ask the question where the power relies, it is very important to say or to determine that if that power comes directly from the community, then there is community ownership, then it will be sustainable. A community focus or ownership has a lot of power, and there could be more change. It is very different for us to intervene with our ways, with our methodologies, and that's going to have an impact in the way that we create this relationship or trust with the communities. Reason why we want to transfer that power to the communities. We also need to understand what capacities the community has, what type of different problems or risk they want to address, and how they're able to bring solutions in order to address those risks. And this way, it is more sustainable. It's more sustainable because we're using local resources, and the community feels motivation to continue after the agency or the entities no longer in the community. Now with this, let me share a little bit about SEEDS. This comes to Save the Children and Work Child. It has a total of 6 phases. Phase 1 is preparation. It's very interesting because what we do is socialize. We're very clear as to what is the focus and what we bring to the community, and we make decisions with the community. Obviously, this poses many challenges. The community can simply say, "We know we're not interested in this," because this is community led. If the community says we do not want this type of intervention, then we must also understand that it is okay and it's not the time. Once the decision is made, we move on to phase 2, which is learning. During this learning phase, this talks a lot or speaks a lot about our Latin American culture, in which we must educate the population, and we need to have that engagement from the community. And we need those leaders that are many times volunteers that are responsible of collecting information. And from that information, we understand what are the different risks or risk, yes, regarding child protection. That leads us to phase 3 for us to understand what are expected outcomes from the community. And from that, we build an attainable plan, and that will have a lot of engagement from the community and not just by a few individuals. Then we implement this action plan led by the community, and then we have the closing and exit. The closing and exit is also determined with the community because we want to hear from them how they want to have this closing of the program and how they want to celebrate this. That is why it leads us to that phase number 5, which is a phase in which we constantly reflect on the outcomes, reflect on our actions, and we work directly with the community leaders and with the community. Actually, we also create dialogue spaces in which we come together with the community and we listen to them. Many times we hear from the community, well, we believe this phase we did not do well in this phase. Okay, let's go back to it. Let's revisit that. Or they would say, well, we did well. Let us continue. The core characteristics of this focus is the prevention approach, strength-based, that works on current or existing and relevant resources and what the community is able to bring to the table. It applies an approach of engagement. In words, is that we work on the soft skills, working directly with the community leaders. We must be humble, show empathy, have that active listening, and to be able to build trust with the communities. SEEDS also holds dialogues with local visions and establishes dialogues with active engagement with local departments or municipalities. SEEDS, and this is something that I must highlight, is that what we seek to achieve is a change of mindset, and not to change the mindset of the community, it's a change of mindset in us as organizations. So we need to move out of that role of experts matters, that we know we have all the know-how of the community, and to become those individuals that are there who provides tools of companionment to the community, so the communities could lead all of the different type of activities. We need to be inclusive, understanding what are the most marginalized groups in the community that many times their voices are silenced. The other thing is that we don't want to force the engagement. We want to help the communities to reflect and to understand if there are many marginalized groups, why they're there, and how to make their voices be heard. So let me share a little bit about Colombia and what we have done in the country with this approach. Back in 2021, we carried out a feasibility project into urban communities in Bogota. Those who have been in Bogota, well, we worked in Usbit in 2 communities that face a lot of poverty, and many of the boys and girls are at a risk in terms of child protection related to physical violence and negligence. We have ran several pilots, and we are currently in the implementation phase. We carried a pilot in the Chocó areas of Colombian Pacific region in 2 indigenous groups that have been affected due to the armed conflict. There is another community that was displaced to the Chocó area, and another community that is near the roadside.
poco más grande en sí.
Then we did another implementation in 5 other cities. It's a community that is affected by immigration, like a 90-something%. Habitants are Venezuelans, and it also belongs to the Guayú indigenous group. So we would say that the upcoming steps that we were expecting with this intervention, and I'll be telling you a little bit more specifically based upon what we have learned in each one of these steps of implementation. It's interesting because it's with young people alongside with the communities where these young people live, and they want to build peace in Colombia, and we're working on the risk of protection with those young people. And an upcoming step that we also want to do is a full assessment of impact of the methodology. So Save the Children and World Change, that's one of the things that they want to do, is ensuring that their methodologies have impact, and that we can ensure that if we implement it in a certain manner, we are going to accomplish what we want. I'm just going to go through this quickly, the lessons learned in all these spaces. In the study of feasibility, we started in 3 stages. We started out on stage of preparation, ethnography, to do participative diagnosis. We did action plans, and after that, we implemented it. And what we learned is that it was too short. It was only 4 months, and then we ended up with a focus of 6 stages. And also, we added another section of reflection, bottom up. And also, we also learned that young people are the ones that can be the leaders of these process of social change in the communities. In Chocó, what did we learn? We implemented it in the indigenous community, and we realized that the community structures that already are existent are very valuable. And we know that the focus of protection can be existent without doing additional committees. And we also learned to build agreements of safeguarding childhood and working alongside in these processes, and not imposing that they have to sign our policies, just working alongside with them and reaching to agreements. In Guajira, we're going to talk more about this because the panel, Jahi, is going to tell us more about this, but something interesting that we learned was the first time of the approach and prioritization that they had in the community. This was not imposed by us. World Child work a lot with recruiting and forced recruiting, but it was the leadership was by the community, and we got to work with this. Involving young people, this is key, and we learned that in an integrated manner, we did it with psychosocial and mental health, both for adults and also children. By doing this, there can be better results in protection, and much more can be done in the psychosocial support in the community. Finally, because I just have a few more, I'm short on time, we did a study case. It was mixed in Guajira, in which we wanted to understand how this focus can support community appropriation. So we did interviews, focal points, forums. All of these things were done, and also quantitative methods for protection. This was also done, and what we found that there's a very high level for community appropriation for the collective responsibility, both for the participants of the studies. They realized that they were the ones that were the first one capable of responding and the first one that responded to the risk for protection. Then we found also the community decisions by young people. This was a very important change, and also the independent functioning of the community that was not dependent of external financing. They felt capable. So I just want to leave you with these last phrases of the study case that we did on two people that participated in the interview and focal points, and it says War Child leaves and the community remains, and who is left with that responsibility after the end of the process is the whole community. Supported us by youth facilitators, we can achieve change and care for the children in the future. And the last one is, now there's greater interest in community issues. Before the community members did not give their opinion. Now they propose things and say what they think. Among the mothers, they're exchanging to teach something to the children and teenagers per week. I would like to really say thank you.
Juan, for sharing such very interesting projects. Now we're going to change a bit the format of our session. So I have a list of questions that I would like to ask our panelists. Some of the questions that we get all the time whenever we do community level child protection training or discussion. So we're trying to preempt some of the common questions that you might have in your mind before we open it up for Q&A. Let me start with our community coach, Berenice. The first question I would like to ask you is that we know facilitation skills is key whenever we promote community-led approach or community ownership. So from your experience, can you share with us how does the facilitation approach within your projects contribute to increase community ownership for child protection? So if you can give us some practical skills or practical tips on how you facilitate that dialogue within the community to promote ownership, that would be great.
Okay. Muy bueno.
Good morning. My name is Mirena Junior Moya. I am Officer of Community Companionship for World Child Organization. The first thing that I want to tell you is that in the past, I would have sessions with methodologies designed from the organization World Child for Children, for girls, boys, and adolescents, and the risk that we found were starting from the edited session. So in SEEDS, everything was different because the identification of the risk is from the community. But now, if I focus on the response of your question, Mrs. Joy told us, how does the focus of facilitating of SEEDS contribute for the feeling of community ownership? In many ways. First of all, it allows for the skills all the facilitators of the community, that they can be empowered. It allows them that potential that they can see, and we get to know the perspectives that they have in regards to the learning process at a community level. It also allows us to have a more wider scope of feedback, not only community facilitators, but the members of the community towards us, as us working alongside with them. This focus allows the communities to get to know more about the problems that are affecting the community, and that they can also tell us what is the plan of work that they are recommending, and us working alongside with them, we accompany them in the process, and we contribute to strengthen and the community appropriation. Adding to this, the focus allows the community that they can be the ones leading their own activities. So I was stating that the community is the one that raises or recommends the work plan, and it also says the timeline, and they're the ones that direct it alongside with us, of course, with the community facilitators and us that are accompanying them and working alongside as well.
Very powerful, always like coming from your local perspective. I want to turn to Juan to ask you about, as a program manager, we face a lot of challenges in training our team, building the capacity of our community facilitators, particularly to equip them with the right facilitation skills to facilitate community dialogue and build relationships. So from your experience as the program manager, how did you build that capacity of facilitation skills of your team?
Gracias, Joy.
Thank you, Joy. This question is really interesting because I think that is one of the greatest challenges, and the challenge is to generate that change, the way of thinking, for them to learn again that role. Like, we're going to train, we're going to know how to respond to a risk of protection, or are we going to equip our teams in this context? But in SEEDS, what we do, it's a whole process of learning that is oriented to the soft skills and also the community skills. So we start out with this workshop, the one that I showed you a little bit earlier, of community appropriation, reflecting on which are the usual means in which each person relates, which are the dynamics that we use to reach to the communities, and what do the communities perceive of appropriation. After that, we work on training, introducing them to SEEDS. Then it comes with the training, working alongside with the community coaching, which also has some elements of coaching, in which we focus on being humble, showing forth empathy, generating process of reflection, facilitating inclusive dialogue, and more so than only the manual of SEEDS, the tools just come into place naturally if the people have the skills, and more so in soft skills, to get this done. So there is a route of learning in which it includes some sessions of learning of the protection and the advisor of protection, working alongside with the community workers. This implies in reflective thinking. Me as the manager, the person in charge, the most important thing for me, it's always not to impose my knowledge. That is how I see it, not bottom up. I understand it. How do I understand child protection and how the communities can respond? But generate that reflection and take questions that my team can also reflect and ensure that the community is always at the head of the process.
Active approach is key. It's not one-off training, right? We do a lot of one-off training, thinking that we will do magic after this training, everyone will be a great facilitator. But it's an ongoing process, keep reflecting what works, what doesn't work, and then we keep improving together. So thanks for sharing the experience. I'm coming back to Marynice again about your day-to-day work as a community coach. So can you share with us like your task within the community level child protection process? How does it look like? Do you go to the community every day? How much time you spend with the community talking with them? So it would be good to get a sense of like what gets you busy every day as a community coach.
Ok.
Well, in fact, during the time that I have to work during the week, the majority of the time I'm with the community, I'm on terrain, and the work that you do as a community worker working alongside with them, it's not easy, but not impossible either. And I want to mention that it's important to constantly be in communication with the community. You have to visit them constantly. Many times I get invited, and generally over there, they tell me, Professor or ma'am, can you accompany us to this activity? Can you interact with us? So each visit, each encounter is always good because we have a community strengthening. Adding to this, we always have to have active listening and listening to them in depth, because it's important to listen to the comments from the community, what are their perspective, and to know what are their point of view, not only from the community facilitators who are accompanying the process, but also the members of the community. I open spaces with the community facilitators far and beyond that, the meetings, because I don't want it to look that we're there seated and they see me as me there accompanying them and I'm the one in charge of the meeting. Many times I open spaces in which the facilitators, community facilitators, they feel good, they feel comfortable, and they don't feel scared to mention something, or I don't want them to feel scared that what they're stating is incorrect. So spaces of dialogue and reflection are always open, constantly of open dialogue, validating with the community. It's important always to validate with the community, because if something, I don't know what sense to state what I'm about to mention, but if something is not okay, the community will let you know, and there you can give possible solutions, not only the community, the person that accompanies in the community, but the community facilitator as well, the members of the community, and us as accompanying the process. When I state validate, it's always very important, because if we do not validate with the community and they're not satisfied with the process, then the process is not going to get done, or there's going to be limiting factors, or there are going to be challenges. So we always ask the community, do you feel good with the process that we're developing? And obviously they're going to give us their point of view, and it's always good to listen to them and apply active listening. I visit the communities, and constantly I'm in communication. Having constant communication allow us to create trust, to build trust, that they don't see us as a member of an organization, but they feel us that we're accompanying them in the community, and that the process is led by those in charge of the communities and the members that are part of the community.
Trust is the key word that I pick up from your sharing. Let me come to you, Olga. So I think we're going to address the elephants in the room, which we get this question all the time. How is it possible to do community-led approach in a humanitarian response? We have very short time frame. We have very restricted donors restriction. How is it possible to put the community at the driver's seat in a response, or in when you are trying to address a vulnerable community who have so many needs and a lot of demands? So it would be good to share from your experience.
Buenos días. Para contestar
Good morning. To answer this question, I'm gonna come out of the methodology that we're currently analyzing, because when we talk about community participation, we should have this present not only when we say we're gonna do a focus that is driven by the communities, always when we're gonna work with the communities, who does it belong to? Which is the life that is gonna be impacted by our action? Who does it belong to? So this takes us to a topic that many years has been moving in the humanitarian sector, and it has been spoken about, but it looks like it's about accountability to the community who is being affected. Seeds, we can see it in an integral manner, how the participation is conceived in each one of the stages of the project, from the stage of planning with the community, how is it implemented with them hand in hand, and how do they assess it. Excellent example of how we promote the participation, not as an external exercise, not as an advisory, separate advisory, or a separate activity, but an integral part of everything that is being done. It doesn't imply a lot of separate time, but thinking in the design of each one of the methodologies, how each one of the stages can generate the community participation in each stage. Accountability gives us other tools that also allow us to accomplish this objective. The communities that they can be in the center of each one of the actions. How then we make sure that the processes keep the communities and they're in constant communication, that they can make decisions informed and they can participate in an informed manner. So in all the projects at the beginning, we always have exercises in which we tell them what we're going to do, but how much do we tell them of how much is our commitment and obligations that we have with the community, and how much do we tell them that they are the ones that should be making the decisions and that they should be the one that should be empowered, and that we should adapt as an organization to do this. So we have to strengthen these processes of information with the community, and that this can be seen during the whole exercise. In Colombia, we have started to dialogue how that relationship with the community is going to be done, and this during the stage of emergency, but this will also be something that has to be prepared. We should not only wait for things to happen, but how we start building that relationship in advance that will allow us to be better prepared to respond. It's important that we can ensure how, as an organization, we're going to be ready to adapt and to respond according to what the communities tell us. And this is one of the great challenges. And it has been a long time that the communities have been telling us to build the responses with them, and they have been giving us multiple recommendations. But sometimes the structures and the procedures and the guidances that we have internationally does not allow us much. Just as you were stating at the beginning, the communities want us to accompany them for a longer time frame, but they tell us that we have to implement quick and we must have results. So what we are learning that is working, that when the communities are the ones that are driving the process, how is it that we have to be transformed? So it's not only that they're the leaders in the action plan, but how these exercises let us reflect and state, as an organization, as a humanitarian sector, there are certain actions that we must start to transform, that we can respond to what they're telling us. Because in an emergency, we do have to act upon quickly, but in time, we are very slow to adapt. So I think that this is part of the great challenges.
To ask Juan, as the program manager, do you have a nice donor for your project that give you flexibility, or you have nice management that don't give you pressure to deliver? So it would be good to know about. I practically wanted to see.
Bueno, no, qué buena.
Well, what a good question. Well, I think that part of what we're trying in topics that are related in the humanitarian architecture and advocacy, I think that there's some donors that are seeking these type of processes, but it's not the most common. So I want to be very clear. And I think that it comes from the development of the project with the communities and the indicators and how we're going to measure the impact that is going to allow us to do a process like this. In Colombia, we have been part of a group of community participation. We're working with communities to think how we can do advocacy and generate that reflection in donors and in our organization and also in the leadership positions. And many organizations, agencies, national organization, international organizations as well. So we build this with the communities and there are 10 points. So these are very easy things that when we present this manifest, it's always basic in regards to the humanitarian work that remind us of that we do a human work for humans, human work, humanitarian work for people. It reminds us something important. The first ones that respond to a crisis are the communities, and those are the people that are there. So when there's any conflict, when there's a displacement, when there's a confinement, the people that are already responding when we get there are the communities. So I think that taking this into consideration, it helps us change how we think internally, not imposing our agendas, our misconceptions. It invites us to build alongside with them. So I think that there's still much more to do in regards to the topic of donors, indicators, results. There's still much more that we can do because it's not easy in emergency projects. Sometimes we just want to get to a certain number of those who have been attended to or individual care, and these type of processes are looking for a more sustainable change that we can equip the communities that they can know how to activate themselves in the process of identifying what is occurring, how they can respond, and how they can connect with other people and organizations that are also responding. In this process, they can identify risk. In these community analysis that they do, they can say, I have a problem related with water and sanitation. We cannot approach it in seeds, but maybe an organization or another agency is doing programs of water and sanitation, so let's look for them. So I think that this will allow more flexibility.
Thank you. Yeah, this is also one of the focus of the task force to really invest in strong advocacies, because I think that we need to really see major changes in the structure, major changes in the funding stream, and that would help us to really see how we can strengthen the community ownership elements in our humanitarian response. I wanted to go to Olga to ask about evidence and learning, as I think donors always ask us, show us the evidence, what works. Like if this works, then we are willing to put money on. So can you share with us how can we continue to create evidence and learning on this kind of approach and its feasibility in humanitarian response? We need to keep showing that this is possible in humanitarian setting. Yeah, thanks.
Well, I think that we should ask ourselves, from where are we building the learning? It's a question, epistemologic question. It's not the spaces that we can sit and debate profound in regards to this, but the way that we produce awareness or knowledge defines the final knowledge or what is being learned. What occurs when we're investigating this type of interventions? We need evidence. And the traditional way of obtaining this evidence is doing very positive clinical approaches. And what it shows us is impact results, And it allows us to state at the end that there was a change. When we think of what this implies, it's a little bit contrary of the principles of participation, because in the center of our design of investigation and the instruments of investigation, people are not there, only the analysis categories. So I want to measure violence against children, and I think, how am I going to measure violence against children? But I'm not thinking about the people. How do they produce knowledge? How can they really communicate their experiences? One of the great challenges to measure these type of interventions is that the instruments, or many of the instruments proven internationally, are based individually. So we're talking about a methodology at a community level. How can we, from the scientific method, start thinking on other ways that are going to allow us to assess at a community level the different impacts? So in this sense, for me to find accountability was marvelous, because it tells us how important the person is. It thinks of how the person communicate, how do they produce their knowledge, and it generates some channels of communications and some mechanisms of feedback that will allow us to really listen and hear what they're stating. And it also allows you to identify if there are barriers that the person can participate or they can state what they're thinking. Why is this that I bring this here? Because in this path, we can start generating other type of evidences, because I don't think that we want to replace one or the other, but we should start to explore the different ways and in some conditions in which we're going to give it a different value or same value of the knowledge that the communities already have, because one is to know and the other one is scientific knowledge. How can we dialogue in regards to these two areas? So from accountability, there's some ways of dialogue and some ways of producing knowledge that could be closer to what the communities are really thinking. And we have a great challenge. And how can we do this in a systematic and coordinated manner? So we talk a lot about the mechanisms of feedback, but we talk very little about the management of information and management of knowledge. On one side, we have the opportunity of these instruments and mechanisms for a better communication, but we need to be more systematic when we're analyzing. We need these conversations not only to stay on paper, we have to have common categories of analysis that will allow us to have enough evidence that is strong enough that would allow us to say that, look, through all these participative exercises, we generated all this evidence, and now I'm going to put it into dialogue with the monitoring results, outcomes, and with the assessments of impact, and how with this we're generating evidence from different standpoints of view and really thinking on the most adequate ways on how the communities can say what they want to say or they need to say. So we would also have to think, sometimes I think that we do know it, but it's not as easy to show this in the impact assessment. We like to say their protection went up 30%. Those numbers are just beautiful, but their focus on investigation with participation, it lets us see knowledge from another standpoint of view. But sometimes the knowledge that is produced is not the one that we need to show the donor, and sometimes we're fearful, and then we go to the secure, quantitative, and positive aspects. These are the ones that we have always been working on, but there's a lot of opportunities. And for me, between producing very scientific and academic it's good, but mixing it with other tools that are going to allow us to have accountability to the affected community.
Enough evidence is a big word in our response program. I feel like it's a huge gap that we have, and there's still a lot to be done to generate more evidence and not just reporting on indicators, but as you say, to consolidate them and making sense of them. So thank you. The last question, I would like to go back to you, Marlies, about how do you make sure that inclusion is ensured in a community-led process? So this process will not be manipulated by community leaders or anyone who have particular interests. So as the community coach, how do you oversee this process that to make sure inclusion is considered?
Bueno,
How do we ensure that inclusion is a process led by the community? Very well. Number one, we must ensure that all the members of the community engage in the activities that are being developed within the framework of a process of seed implementation. Based on the different dynamics that are being developed within the community, we create focus groups. For example, in Moravia, what has helped us, or it helped in the implementation process, when we began, we developed focus groups from different populations. For example, we developed the XY activity and the focus group for adolescents, for boys and girls, for youth, adults, and the elders, or people with disabilities, and people that are also part of the community LGBTQ+. So we create all these focus groups, and from these focus groups, we developed the activities. This worked, and in fact, we continue to implement this in other activities that we are developing in new implementations. Now, I would also like to share an experience that we had during our learning phase, which in fact was mentioned by Juan, which is phase number 2. When we applied these community tools, like some of them were a problem tree, we worked with adolescents. We also developed community maps with adult focus groups. We did several of walks or tours in the communities, working directly with the adults and the elderly and individuals with disabilities and focus groups. During this whole process, we involved individuals that are part of the community LGBTQ+ in order to expand our inclusion, so everyone in the community feels involved in all of the different activities in terms of the SEED program.
For all the sharing, it's like really, really interesting, and we hope to learn more as we continue our learning journey. But let me open it up for any questions that you might still have about community-led approach in the project or in general in humanitarian response. Okay, great. Is anyone? Helen. So we might take a few before we respond, and if you have any specific question for any particular speakers, please also mention so that we can direct the questions to them.
Gracias. Y quiero agradecer la presentación.
Thank you very much. In fact, I want to thank you all for your community-based presentations. But my question is the following. Based on your experience, this accountability process, what is the outcome? Because we do carry out exercises or activities with the communities, and the expectations are very high that transcend the humanitarian, that move into the stability, maybe reach the development, and probably we won't be able to respond to all of those unsatisfied or unmet needs or unmet basic needs in their communities. So in these exercises, accountability exercises, post-activities, how do you provide a report? How do you report back when you're not able to meet all the expectations? How do you manage the frustration because of the limitations that we have whenever we serve a community? Thank you for that great initiative and project. In fact, that is what we want to have, accountability, specifically in the Colombian context. Now, my question is for Juan. What's the next step? How do we go back and review sustainability? What in the timeline and using what methodology?
How are you doing to organize your exit plan? Because we have been talking about the process, so we need to understand what about your exit plan when you are dealing with these communities.
Okay, maybe we will take these 3 questions first, and then we will gather another round of questions. So 2 main questions, one related to accountability process. How do you manage expectation? How do you provide feedback if you're not able to meet all the needs and requests? And then for Juan, I think Jonas' question is related to the sustainability one. So how do you plan to exit, and how do you monitor the sustainability after the project ends? Maybe Olga first, and then Juan.
Thank you very much for the question. I think that is one of the main challenges that we have. In fact, many times when you start creating those spaces of consultations with the communities, we have this sense that it is a list of going to the a grocery list. And many times we think to ourselves, we need to do something differently, because we should start by building a different type of relationship with the community, because we are perceived as those who bring the solutions. So if we're focusing in empowering the community, we are still perceived as those who bring the solutions. So if we are perceived this way, then we need to revisit what we're doing. So it is important to say that we don't do this only at the end. We do this from the start. From the start, how do we establish the foundations of our relation with the community? How from the start we're able to come together with the community to build the vision of that community, and for in that future, what they envision as a community, from that objective, how can we as an organization going to be part of their story, and that we know that is going to go beyond our intervention, and how we're going to support that whole process to meet their expectations. So how do we guarantee this? Evidently, this will happen. The grocery list will happen, and there's no formula. It depends on the community. There are communities that have organizational processes that are not consolidated, that have greater needs, and without a doubt, any person that comes as an outsider or an external person, there's going to be perceived as that individual who brings a solution, and they're going to be overflowing with expectation. So we need to establish what solid expectations can we build with the community. So when they lead the process, and in this construction phase or building phase, we can tell them we are here to support, let's say, to strengthen your agency or ownership. And based on that, if we see that we needed to build advocacy or continue our advocacy in front of the government, then we can continue doing that part. But it should be owned by the community. So I think what's key here is to build a different type of relationship with the community, and not just wait till the end. Yes, without a doubt, this is not a magic solution. In some populations, you'll be able, or communities, you'll be able to do this. With others, you will not. But I think it's continuous exercise, working with the communities, and also revisit how we communicate our roles. Because many times we say, no, we're not here with a solution. But when we're on the field, we act as if we're bringing the solutions. So we need to be consistent. And we also have to train our staff, because from the way we act or behave, we're already communicating, and this is being perceived by the community. So I would say that those are a few elements that could be considered in regarding this question. Thank you very much. In fact, I would like to build on what you just said very briefly to that first question. Oh, there's more. Yes. Another thing is something that I didn't say is that we are not the state. And that is critical and important. So with our interventions, we are engaging all of the different actors and their responsibilities. Many times the problems are too large and we won't be able to tackle it as a whole. But if we understand clearly who are the actors, what are your responsibilities and your roles, then we know exactly what is going to be the objective that's going to be achieved. Very well. I just want to briefly add something to that first question. When we divide this topic and we say this is a humanitarian topic, we talk to the communities about this. They say this is not existent. But when we arrive to a community, they already had that problem prior for our intervention, and when we leave, most likely the problem or different realities will be present in that community. Reason why we need to build relationship based on trust. So that leads me to the question is, yes, we need to have that list, and if in that grocery list we don't have child protection, then we must address that. Sometimes we talked about sanitation and clean water, health, even the building of structures, and we're very clear from the start that when we socialize what we're going to address, the community must understand there are certain things that we are going to address and we are not going to address. In fact, there was a community in Quinto, and there was a roof that fell. And they said, well, no problem. Seed can fix this. But no, it doesn't work like this. We use the same process of the other intervention, and they applied the same process in order for them to work as a community to build the trust. So the roof. So when there is trust, then we're able to openly speak to the community, which should be something that we should always practice. We carried a very small case study. It was a 10-month period where we did an initial measuring, and then we measured at the end. And in fact, we had also measured in the 3 months in order to measure or gauge what was happening in the community. And we were able to identify that at the beginning, after 3 months, and at the end, the communities were keeping up with the activities. There were some activities that they just didn't fulfill, but there were others that were working. So that's another way we must gauge which activities are being applied or implemented in the community. And that includes sustainability. In SEEDS, we assess risk. If we identify 5 topics, we only prioritize 2. And in fact, we ask the community, can we work on all these 5? So if we can't work on all 5, let's think about 2. And then on the following months, we go back and we revisit, are we going to focus on these 2 risks related to child protection, or do we need to change it? In Guajira, in one of the communities that we worked in, there was a leader from the community that a community leader that was responsible of entertainment activities. They brings our methodology, our processes, and processes from UNICEF. And what this leader did was that they would not allow that the caregivers or the parents to send out their children to collect recyclable material, because that's considered work. So what they did is that they worked directly with the families for all of them to do this together. And we just followed up after 3 months just to see if this was continued. In fact, it was continued. Now, regarding the exit plan, in SEEDS and in our manual, we have ways, guidelines as to how we can hold dialogues with the community, that exit strategy. It's not a established way or timeline. We can't say, well, in 2 months we were going to exit. We work this with the community, and we determine with the community how we're going to exit, in what time we're going to exit, and we even coordinate celebrations of this exit. That way they understand that, well, with that celebration, that represents the exit of war child from the community. Then we go back, and yes, we visit those leaders that are empowered, and they continue with the work, but they become facilitators of SEEDS, and they represent SEEDS but not war child.
So we should have time for another round of questions if you have more questions.
Sí, buenos días.
Yes, good morning. My question is, how do you work in communities that have this community ownership mindset, where they have been exposed to other interventions and they have worked in more traditional ways of development, or that the interventions walk in and they say, well, we're here as the heroes and we're bringing the solutions. What do you do when there are bad practices and you need to change them? Thank you. I have a question for all of you. One, let me start. You talked about a manifesto with NGOs, agencies, and communities. Does this mean, are you talking about the flagship initiative in which Colombia was chosen between 4 countries in which you're trying to pilot this initiative? I ask this because the idea is to build and to manage knowledge and not start with zero knowledge. So it's very important to understand is within the framework of the initiative was this manifest comes out of. Now, Marenice, the fact that you work with communities and you talked about your role that is more as a accompaniment, right? But we know that we have good days and days that are not so good with the communities. So how do you work when there is pressure or tension of the staff that's in the field that creates that emotional tear down, because you want to provide that accompaniment and achieve the results, but those individuals that are in the field suffer because they're there on the field the day that they see, well, I'm not achieving the results, and I see that those children are being beaten and they're being exposed to violence. So how do you breathe in and respect those community processes without being violent against those cultures or practices? How do you manage this at an emotional level? And now for Olga, what is the advocacy that, what type of advocacy is being done in terms of sharing this vision? Or I should rather say, how do we change these paradigms? How do we build knowledge? How is this having a true impact in the humanitarian structure? And I go back to the flagship, because there's so many things we're talking about, so many different topics, and I don't want this just to stay at the discourse level. I want this to come back and be more pragmatic.
Thank you. Hola.
Hi, thank you very much. All of the topics that have been presented have been very interesting. Could you share examples, practical examples of different projects that you have developed with seeds? What type of specific service have you provided, specifically in terms of sustainability? I know other colleagues have asked, however, I'm thinking, what type of support have you provided in order for this to be, your intervention be sustainable? Now, I have a question for Olga. In regards to innovation in order to measure evidence, you did mention very interesting things, such as changing the mindset and not only moving in and looking into the quantitative indicators. Could you also share examples of different measuring systems based on community engagement? Thank you.
I think we only have enough time to take the 3 questions. Actually, it's more than 3. I'm trying to capture them. Maybe I would like to start with the community ownership mindsets that one participant posed. I think it's a great question, and we got this question all the time as well, because we are not just operating as one agency in a humanitarian response. There are so many other agencies might be using traditional approach that contradictory to your idea about community ownership. So how do you deal with it when there's bad practices or not so much about community ownership? I don't know, Juan or Olga, Maris? Okay, please.
Me confundí.
Very well. I'm going to start, and then Berenice is going to build on this because she has a lot of inputs regarding this topic. How do we address and how do we try to develop a community-owned process when there were other processes or intervention in the communities where they use traditional type of processes? Well, I think the answer can come directly from Berenice, but the invitation here is to be honest, clear, transparent as to what we are bringing to those communities. And I think it's also valid to say that during our implementation, there were other organizations that were doing other types of interventions or implementations that were more oriented into the delivery and exit. In the beginning, we had some difficulties in the level of engagement because there were some overlapping activities. So another key is to coordinate with the other agencies, because that way among agencies we have a clear understanding as to what are the interventions that each agency is bringing, and to create some spaces in order for us to integrate or provide a comprehensive intervention to communities. So I think the start is to be very transparent and clear as to what is going to be achieved with the process. Now, along the way, people start catching up and they start to value that relationship built with our community leaders and those who provide the accompaniment, because what we are achieving with this change of mindset is changes at a social level, and the individuals start asking for more. Are there other skills? Are there other things that we can work on? Thank you. And I'm going to stop there. Yes, I would like to build something or add something that's very important. When we started the process as War Child in the community, we did not start with the seed methodology, but other methodologies designed by the organization. So what we wanted to do was to change the focus in which we were there to teach and to provide seminars regarding child protection in a safe space with 15 children. So it was no longer within a safe space, but within community meetings or meetings with the whole community. That way other people could engage, could participate, and this way we could achieve that community empowerment and ownership. We didn't work only with children. It was boys, girls, adolescents, adults, and the elders, the whole community. Right now, we're working with the community. We have a youth group. There's a youth group that was already there before we arrived. So as an organization, through the seed implementation, the only thing we did was to strengthen that youth group. Currently, that youth group has skills that they had were simply strengthened. It is an empowered youth group that's highly motivated to participate in other activities, and they involve the whole community. And they don't only involve the communities in one activity, but in all of the activities that are being developed in their communities.
Time, so maybe let me try to consolidate the question about scaling up, making it just beyond Colombia as the pilot, and what we can do to strengthen our advocacies to make it a reality in humanitarian program that we can promote community-led approach. Anyone, Olga or?
futuro, ¿qué hay que empezar por unos
Well, I think we should start through some processes of internal strengthening of organization because we are talking about the management of information in the humanitarian global network, and we're talking about the organizations itself. So in my current role that I have in UNCHR, currently one of the biggest challenges is to consolidate this system to that we can have all the information, to have a place in which we're reporting all the feedback that is arriving, and we're trying to generate an evidence at a national level that we can start to do advocacy internally. There are programs that involve many areas and that also involve many territories. And usually what happens that each one is seated on their territory, just looking at what's in front of them. So having information management in common is what allows us to make the case and we can generate the evidence. I think that all the organizations need to strengthen these processes internally. That way we can start thinking on the interagency space, how we dialogue one with the other. In Colombia, there's a lot more that we still need to do. But there's some colleagues that presented at the events. I don't remember the name. They presented proposal of collective accountability, looking at it from this focus of accountability. So they presented common categories, a proposal that would allow that if each organization, if it was strengthened and it uses these focus and it uses these categories, we're going to get to compare what we're doing. When we can do a comparison, we can have evidence that is going to allow us to do advocacy at a global level. But this is something that is we're still building upon this. I think you were the one that asked me about that. But currently, in the strengthening, internal strengthening, we are doing that exercise. And how to have other systems to measure that are different. So I see that there's a great potential that if we can be contextualized with the mechanisms of feedback, if a community requires that they can be oral, or if it functions that they can do theater forum, or if it's better for them written, then we adapt. But the systematic feedback, we can start incorporating it in a same system of information management. It will allow us to have evidence that will communicate with all the other data that is picked up through assessment and monitoring. We're in that internal process to get to do this, ensuring the evidence that comes out of it, it will be in the spaces of committees of follow-ups in the projects. Also in decision making, let us place the decisions that come from the community through the channels of feedback with the evidence that we're getting from the traditional processes. So just going back to seeds in the measurement systems, which is not a system, but it's a tool. But one of the things that was explored was to design tools of data recollecting from the communities, with the communities, from the difference of an ICAST that is already designed. There was already a process of consultation, of consult of the communities, boys and girls, for protection and safety, based upon this exercise of dialogue with them, that if after you're interested in getting to know more about this, then we can share this information with the colleagues that do this, then we would build the questions of investigation, and then it will become a quantitative instrument, and then it became part of the study. So we have to do it on the two sides. We have to walk the two sides. Let's continue generating evidence scientifically in a rigorous manner, but let us put this in dialogue with the other other evidences that we can generate it in another manner, and that we have to be very robust at the time that we're analyzing, and we have to make sure that when we interpret it, we have spaces that the community, that the analysis will not only be ours, but it's really what the communities are stating.
Talk a lot about this topic, and I encourage you to continue the conversation after the session. And thank you so much for all the interesting question and dialogue, and thank you for staying at the end, even we are over time. I take the last opportunity to again advertise the theory of change for the community level child protection programming. I think it's a starting point. If you could also check on that document and see how these apply to your programming, I think we can definitely consolidate more learnings and evidence to build on our higher level of community ownership approach. But thank you so much for attending these sessions, and we'll see you around and continue our conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Joy.
But because of Q&A.
Voting first, and then you can start your presentation now.
Hi everyone, to attend the Sanwal Aliens workshop in person. However, visa difficulties for Afghan nation made it impossible for me to be here. Despite this, I'm happy to have this opportunity to contribute remotely to the annual Aliens workshop. My abstract title is Women's Engagement. This is Tawfiq Niazi.
Voting first, and then you can start your presentation now.
Hi everyone, this is Tawfiq Niazi, the Child Protection. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I will provide you some overview on
Voting first.
my abstract title is Women's.